There's like a legitimate debate. One is like, we need to have a conservative viewpoint represented here on this if we're going to cover what is happening in politics. The other side of it is, okay, but what if you can't find anybody that offers that point of view that can do so without blatantly lying constantly in defense of Donald Trump? And we're back with my old friend Ben Smith, editor-in-chief of Semaphore, host of the Mixed Signal Pod with Naima Raza. Previously, he was media columnist at the New York Times and founding editor-in-chief at BuzzFeed. His latest book is Traffic. It's out in paperback. You can go find it at, I don't know, a Barnes & Noble near you. What's up, Ben?
Thank you for all the plugs, Tim. It's very nice to see you.
Dude, I'm plugging away. Okay, I want to start here. You know, there are a lot of media conversations over the last 9 years. You're probably bored with this conversation about how one deals with Donald Trump. And but I think that a lot of times there are various inflection points that can make us think about it. And I've been thinking about it a lot this week in the wake of the trial verdict. I know it's something you're talking about on the new pod. And I'm just wondering, like, how you would grade how we're doing here broadly in the media, because I look at this and I just think I think that Trump is still, kind of playing a lot of people like a fiddle.
I mean, it was a very strange situation for the bulk of the trial. Like, we're down here in Lower Manhattan, and it's 2 blocks from here, and I was like unable to find parking for my Kia Niro because it's such a circus, like a legit media circus of live trucks and cameras. And yet there was like this sense, it felt like during the trial that like the journalists weren't really sure whether like the wires were connected, like whether anybody was listening on the other end of their stories about this trial of the century. I guess I thought that the actual coverage of the verdict, like, this is a big historic story, the president getting convicted, and it felt that way, and the coverage felt that way. And I think now the question is, I think that, one of the challenges is that political coverage in general, a lot of the decision making about what's covered is made by the campaigns. And the Trump campaign was totally ready to come out of this, say that it was, persecution, and send him to a UFC fight, and they knew exactly what they were doing. And the Democrats really had no plan. I think a lot of them thought he was going to be acquitted or was going to get a hung jury. Didn't and then the White House in particular seems to have basically made a decision to talk very little about it. And so the sort of normal hacky political routine of, well, Donald Trump says he's innocent, but Joe Biden says he's guilty, is replaced by Donald Trump says he's innocent and Joe Biden gave a long speech about the Middle East.
Yeah. How is it that we haven't figured out how to deal with this by now here in the middle of 2024?
Because we don't have as much power as we think we do, I think, is the fundamental answer. Like, deal with this what? Like, if only you tweeted something a little better, like...
I just mean deal with, like, not buying, like, Donald Trump's snake oil bullshit so easily. I mean, I was like the number of people who've been out saying, "Oh, I don't know. Do we think this is going to help him?" Like, is Trump and all his people are pitching about how it's going to help him, and it's like, really? I mean, you cannot even conceive of a universe in which Hillary gets convicted of felonies for her emails, and people are on TV the next day being like, this could really be a big boost for the Clinton campaign.
Yeah, that particular strain of analysis, I agree with you, was just on its face pretty dumb.
Yeah. But like, just as an overall, don't you feel like that there's been, I guess, how do you think about this at Semaphore? Don't you think it's just like, it's very challenging to figure out with how to think about the flood the river with shit dynamic with him? Like, I was on the plane home from New York, I was watching a documentary about the 76 campaign, and it's like, Jimmy Carter's big scandal was telling Playboy that he cheated in his heart, and Gerald Ford's big scandal of that campaign was like on a debate stage where he tried to be a little cute and say that Soviets aren't really dominating Eastern Europe, and he was trying to be like, well, they're not dominating the people are still free, but he sounded really dumb explaining it, and like those were the big scandals. So it's just like, none of that. I mean, if Donald Trump had said one of those things in the Bronx, like, it wouldn't even appear in the Semaphore write-up the next day. So like, how are we supposed to deal with that as we look forward to the rest of it?
Right. with a campaign in which one of the candidates, I mean, and this is an old story about all these right-wing populists, not just Trump, that the things that they say that are outrageous and that the media's reflex is to scold them are like built to travel through our scolding. Right. And that and Trump is saying things that are offensive or outrageous or sexist with like the express intent that we get upset and amplify them, and that people on Facebook get outraged and share them. And so, and I think it's, I think the answer is there's not a simple answer. And for a while you saw this reflex, which was, we're just not going to cover these outrageous things. We're not going to get played. And then somebody noticed, like, hey, did you notice that during that speech he said he was going to, use the National Guard to start dragging, to deport millions of people in his first 100 days? Like, maybe we should cover that. I mean, I guess to the degree that I think there is sort of a smart, responsible way to cover it, I think being focused on what he actually says he is going to do as president is the most important part of the coverage. But I don't think that really gets you away from, like, do you cover his visit to the UFC event, which is a pretty interesting political phenomenon, right? Like the extent to which sort of masculinity has become the center of the campaign. Or do you not, because it's a stunt that aimed at distracting from the fact that the guy just got convicted of 34 felonies?
That's a good question. I don't know. What's the answer to that question?
I think if there was like a really simple, obvious answer, we would know.
Yeah, and the UFC guy in the post-game press conference is talking about how great Trump is. And so there's this whole ecosystem out there where people are getting those clips, and that's like absent from the mainstream commentary almost.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
I felt this way. Me and Olivia were talking about this, me and Olivia Nuzzi, because when I was we were at one of these TPUSA events, and it's the kind of thing that you send Weigel to, and like they were really
we
don't
kind of send
interesting.
Him. We can barely talk him out of going.
Exactly.
And we don't even we reject those expenses, but he still goes.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that, like, in 2017, people are like, wow, this is fascinating. It's like an alt CPAC that's even crazier, and a bunch of people went, and then there's a period of time, and then it's like 2023, and it's only Weigel and Olivia and me, and like nobody else is there, and we're like, well, wait, haven't we overcorrected the other way here? Like, isn't it a little concerning? Like, if Trump wins again, these are the people that are going to be running things.
Yeah, and I think those are the stories that are really obvious to tell and smart to tell. This Project 2025 stuff, where they're really trying to lay the groundwork for an administration run by Kash Patel or whoever. Like, that's real, like, reportable stuff that you can try to figure out. Although, of course, there is also a layer of everybody at TPUSA is going to tell you that they're going to be the Secretary of State in the hopes that you'll quote them, Trump will see it and learn their name. And so, there's this, it's just a very strange ecosystem of which the media, is part, but maybe a smaller part than we used to be.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. That's is something that I think about too at those things, where it's like, even me, they kind of even want to talk to me. And I'm like, oh God, am I being used because they want, like, a fight with me is good, in some way? It's a tough challenge. What do you think? Okay, my final meta media Trump question. There was an exchange over the weekend by my quasi colleague George Conway, my quasi podcast colleague. He has a really well rated podcast, Ben, with Sarah Longwell and Scott Jennings, my old colleague from the Jeb campaign, where George is basically like, "You're a liar. Stop lying. Like, why is CNN paying you?" And then Casey Hunt chastises him, and we are back to the same old debate. Like, it was in 2016, it was CNN was having Jeff Lord on set giving an absurd defense of everything Trump did, and then in 2020, CNN like swung to the Zucker model of righteous indignation, and now we're back to square one. What do you think about, what would you do if they had you replace Chris Licht?
I mean, I think the thing is, Jeff Zucker is a brilliant television programmer and did the only possible thing from a business perspective, which is that, like, there's a limited set of people who watch cable television every day. Some of them die of old age, and you're not going to find new people. It's over. But there's a bunch of people over at MSNBC. This is what Zucker saw. Yeah. And our biggest pool of, like, still living cable news viewers is over there, and we have to go get them by being more anti-Trump than MSNBC. And that is what he did. And then there were all sorts of highfalutin theories about like, well, maybe we can get the people who are watching HGTV who just want some fair news coverage. Like, nope, they tried, didn't work. Cable television is a slowly but genuinely collapsing ecosystem. And, some of the people are there to be mad at Joe Biden and some are there to be upset at Donald Trump. And there aren't other people. And so you can serve one of those two communities, or you can not devote your life to cable television. But but I don't. I mean, that's it.
You wouldn't have taken.
That's
the
it.
job
I mean,
that had been offered
it's
to
a job that I think it is a very good paying job. So I don't know, but it is. But I do think that it's sort of a story about the business of this very strange medium that had its 20 years of dominance and is dying. And when you try to answer it in sort of moral terms or even journalistic terms, you're missing the way people who make television shows are actually making decisions.
Yeah. Somebody sent me the stats on the median viewer of these networks' age. The median was like 68. Median. So
right.
For every person under 68, there's an older person. It's pretty old.
And I think and Fox is older, and they sometimes run into issues with the ratings that they stop rating. That like the number stops at a certain age, and so it's hard to develop averages.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have one more follow up on that. I hear there you go. That was good from a business standpoint. This is you're a media businessman now. But what about just
no? I don't mean to be cynical. I'm just trying to explain the decision making.
No. That was good. There are two parts to this, and that was a very cogent explanation of the decision making. Now the question of the journalistic integrity question, which is I think there's a legitimate debate here. I don't want to sound like I'm gilding the lily. There's a legitimate debate. One is like we need to have a conservative viewpoint represented here on this if we're going to cover what is happening in politics. The other side of it is, but what if you can't find anybody that offers that point of view that can do so without blatantly lying constantly in defense of Donald Trump? And it's like, maybe there's not a good answer to that question either, but isn't that fundamental?
I mean, I think it sort of depends. I don't, I guess I sort of reject the idea that we should be looking to cable news for our as a sort of journalistic lodestar, that's where the most important ethical decisions in journalism are made. I mean, I think there are two different kind of important kinds of stories. Like there is the, I think, totally legitimate kind of reporting that's like, what is happening? What motivates Donald Trump supporters? Yeah. What motivates right-wing populism? I think there was some very dumb stories written out of diners that people like to make fun of, but actually that kind of journalism is totally legitimate. Like you do want, and what motivates people who are protesting Gaza? Like leaving social media, talking to people who are committed and engaged in politics, trying to figure out what's going on. I think that's really valuable and useful. That's not Jeff Lord, right? That's somebody who likes Jeff Lord's podcast. Yeah. And then the other is, I think it depends to some degree, like, do you believe that there's a huge political realignment underway in which at some level, like the Bernie people and the Trump people are moving into one party, and both parties are fighting really hard to make that their party, by the way, right? Like, and that the sort of, J.D. Vance on bills with Democratic legislators and Josh Hawley on bills with Democratic senators, that we're going to see more and more of that, and that maybe, and that's that is our politics now, and that whether it's Donald Trump, who knows, but that kind of right-wing populist movement is real and is something that is going to be a major political force. I think it's pretty hard to argue with, honestly. Yeah, and I think that you can't be dismissive of it. I mean, these are people who maybe you think shouldn't be on television because they have insane views about the 2020 election, but are in fact co-presenting bills with Democratic senators on important issues.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And that's really more comes down to maybe they shouldn't have 18-person panels, analyzing just the political takes. And that's the problem. Yeah, exactly. And just interview the newsmakers on there, because I think that's totally legitimate. Anyway, that's probably doesn't rate as well, which speaks to the problem. But are the 70-year-olds that are dying changing the channel? Maybe that doesn't matter. I don't know.
Actually, I once asked Chris Ruddy, Newsmax is really the most sort of extreme version of this, of just treating its viewers like they're morons and manipulating them, particularly around the election. And I asked Chris Ruddy, like, isn't it an issue that you're on channel 973 or whatever? But he said apparently older people now just all talk to their remotes, and just so it's fun. I didn't know that. I learned, and I last night.
Yeah, I think that's true. I have a very when I moved into this house, I have a very nice neighbor, elderly woman. who has lived in the house for like 60 years, who is when I walked down the street the first time she saw me, she was like, "You're the boy from 728, whatever the channel is." And I was like, "Yeah, that's me." We have a nice little exchange now. All right, one thing I wonder, as you think about the new pod and media coverage in general, I've just made this mistake I'm about to ask you about, which is like there's this obsession with what's going on the dying platforms, and meanwhile, increasingly between YouTube and TikTok, like the amount of political news that people are getting that is just totally almost unnoticed by the DC New York media is pretty astonishing. I mean, I go on Brian Taylor Cohen's show all the time. He gets like 1 million views, a YouTube thing. You know, there's Destiny. There's I guess there's kind of there's a right wing media monitoring universe out there, but you know, every once in a while I'm scrolling through TikTok and like I'll come up on something and like the person I've never heard of, and it'll have 1 million views. Like how are you guys thinking about that?
Well, it's fun. It's interesting because the thing that kills me about that is there's so little like original reporting and new information being provided by that ecosystem, but a lot of opinions.
It's a great
The
point.
the I think the big story right now of media in general, it's a very hard one to cover, is just fragmentation. The biggest stuff, like the really big, powerful, important stuff, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, whatever, is mostly getting smaller. The New York Times, Washington Post, smaller, like not going away, but doesn't have the power it once what did. And then there's a lot of small and medium sized stuff that's kind of getting bigger, but it's not going to be as big as those things were. It's just, and so you have this ecosystem that's like very, very fragmented. The most interesting stat in this is that there was a Pew did a survey a couple years ago about podcasts, and they asked people, who's your favorite podcast host? What's your favorite podcast? And obviously the majority said you, but of everybody else, the number one was Joe Rogan. But the most interesting thing was that number one slot was just 5% of people who say they have a favorite podcast host. Right. So that's an unusual market where where the top share is 5%. I mean, we're used to markets like search where Google has 99%. And so it's this very, very fragmented universe where people are getting information from a vast array of different places, and you don't know where the other people are getting information from, and it's hard to generalize. And I think that's
it shows how tiny most of those are. That Joe Rogan, despite your kind comments, is like 100x me. It's a very interesting market in that there is Joe Rogan at 5%, and then there's like a cut down to another group of people. You know what I mean? And
most of the consumption is happening kind of in the middle of the tail.
Yeah.
I think really for better and for worse. Like we're coming out of this world where really we were all on one of two giant platforms, all seeing the same stuff. If somebody was like on Twitter in the height of the 2020 election and I looked over their shoulder on the subway, they were like reading the same tweet I had just read. Right. If I'm on the subway now seeing somebody listening to something, I have no idea what it is. And is that healthy or less healthy? I don't know. The last time around did not work so good.
Yeah, this takes me to kind of one of the book topics I wanted to talk to you about. So, the book Traffic was, kind of about the downfall of this model of we're going to try to get as many eyeballs as possible. It was a race to go viral. We're going to, pay for this via advertising dollars by the, just unbelievable amount of eyeballs that we're getting. And as you flip that to a model now that is more fragmented and subscriber based, right, where people are, in a lot of these cases, people are paying, the individual, platform or the individual content provider that they are interested in, the one that they're a super fan of, right? And I was just saying today, I just saw today, even MSNBC is doing this now. I got to promote today, like the MSNBC Plus. We've been doing it for a while, the Bulwark. And so how, like, doesn't that eventually lead to its own kind of problems with just think of the detritus that the people who don't pay, for information are going to be served, you know what I mean? Like
right. That as we swing toward an ecosystem where media is paid, that all the free stuff is garbage and the quality, like that you can pay for quality and otherwise you get garbage and misinformation.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's to some degree where we already are.
That's happening.
But although
you don't have thoughts on that, that's just our reality.
Although I do think that we who are in the business like to think about the supply side, but actually a lot of people, like if you, in fact, as there was a survey where they offered people in Boston free subscriptions to the Boston Globe and nobody would take them. Like the barrier to people reading what we think of as quality news is not always money. Like people pay for Spotify, they pay for things they want. And a lot of people don't consume what you and I never did think of as quality news. Meanwhile, do watch local television, which from time immemorial has just kind of ripped off the front page of the local paper and read it out loud, which is great. So it's a little complicated. I mean, I do think more broadly in the media business, there's an impulse to say like subscriptions are immoral because they shut out the population, or advertising is immoral because it is corrupting and melts your brain or whatever. But actual functioning successful media businesses tend to find models where they do some of both and have some of the stuff that's available for everybody, and build these pretty complicated mixed models. So I don't know. I'm not
This
that
is kind of depressing, though.
ideological
The
about it.
demand side argument. I had Derek Thompson on last week. He made the same argument about there's a demand side problem, is that people want, controversial. People want conflict, and that's what
Yeah,
they're
they want to
drawn
be
to.
entertained.
But my question is, like, in an old world, like, okay, if people on the demand side wanted to go buy tabloids, if they wanted to, watch wrestling or whatever, like, they were still, just by the nature of the limited number of options, like being force-fed vegetables at certain times during the day, be it whether it be the local news or whether it be Tom Brokaw or whatever. And it's like, now that they don't have to be ever fed vegetables ever. So I know you get brought to these little, media confabs where goody two shoes people try to solve that problem. Like, is there a solve to the demand side problem in a world where there's unlimited supply?
I don't know. I mean, I do not know. I mean, I do. I guess I think that when you add up all these small podcasts and shows, and some of the TikToker commentary is very good. You do. I think that one way or another, a lot of people, a majority, want to be informed. It may not exactly be the thing that you and I want, but it's also they don't want to be lied to. I think you can underestimate the kind of intelligence and curiosity of regular people who aren't necessarily into like this podcast and this style of podcast, or into 1,000-word articles. But I mean, this whole system of ours really fundamentally depends on the intelligence and curiosity of some decent number of our fellow citizens. And I do think if you look at, I mean, I think Joe Rogan's a decent example. It's not like my favorite program, but it's also, and there he says some stuff I think is nuts. But it's also largely kind of long form political interview,
He's
long
curious.
form interview.
I'll give him this. He's curious.
He's curious. He's in his way trying to be fair. He has sometimes quite interesting people on talking about interesting stuff. I mean, it's not perfect, but the person who's listening to that isn't saying, I want like a like a 14-second montage of violence, or please lie to me, right? Like there's another impulse there.
Yeah. Maybe it's not. I worry less about please lie to me is maybe a little more of like, please explain to me why all the people I hate are wrong. That's the impulse that I think is hardest to break in this.
Yeah,
in that cycle.
I think, and maybe I'm just horribly optimistic. I think the sort of peak social media of like 2016, 2018 was really like perfected that, because the thing it turned out to be best at was finding the like most grotesquely expressed view of your enemy and bringing it to your attention.
Yeah.
And the kind of like these the formats that are now popular, newsletters and podcasts and surprisingly long YouTube shows, actually like aren't really built that way. Like they tend to leave some space to breathe and to have reasonable disagreements.
Okay. I don't know if I share your
optimism?
rosy optimism there, but I like it though. We'll leave it on that. I want to ask you about one news item today. I always pronounced it the Epoch Times until I wrote a long form article about them and realized they called themselves the Epoch Times, which I think maybe is a little bit of a translation
An epoch, by the way, meaning like an age, right? Like an era.
Yeah, like an epic. Bill Guan, the publisher of the Epoch Times, was indicted on Monday on charges of participating in a massive money laundering scheme. 67 million? Was it million or billion?
Yeah, million.
67 million. Not quite a bit. Well, like, this is another example of one of these things, right? That it's like the Epoch Times is everywhere. It's advertising in the subways, it's advertising on YouTube, and a lot of they had newspapers that were going out everywhere, and it was, there was some oversight from time to time. People would write articles about it, but kind of outside of the view of the mainstream political culture was like advancing a lot of kind of kooky wild-eyed views. It turns out to have been a grift, I guess, which was pretty obvious to anyone that was looking that closely. What do you have
I was
any
not.
big
I mean, it
thoughts on
was
the
really.
Epoch Times?
I mean, only that this is just one of the great weird media stories ever. I mean, because it's not. I mean, honestly, the notion that they were their real revenue stream was it's allegedly stolen phone cards or something. I mean, it just seemed total cryptocurrency. It just seemed. I read the indictment and I'm still confused, but it didn't seem like it was media related fraud.
Their
It
revenue
seemed
stream
like
wasn't from the ads.
they were
from
laundering
shows?
money from some other. Basically, they had some other criminal enterprise, and the media business was like a restaurant through which you launder your money from your gambling and prostitution operations if you're the mafia or whatever, or drug dealing. Like the media for it was just the like storefront. And what a weird storefront. And because it was trying to make itself as kind of like the pro-Trump New York Times, and really more deeply than that, the anti-China New York Times. Because the other thing to know about the Epoch Times is that it is, I would say, I've written about this, and it's complicated. People have written controlled by or run by, but I think linked to is maybe the right way to say it. Falun Gong, which is this dissident Chinese spiritual practice, which the Chinese government claims is a cult and has cracked down on incredibly brutally, and is in exile running a pro-Trump, anti-China newsletter because why not? And also allegedly doing some money laundering.
The whole thing is so bizarre. Even before the money laundering story, it was
like
bizarre.
I guess the thing is, it's like the thing about this whole operation is it just screams like people who believe that the ends justify the means. But I've totally lost track of which are the ends and which are the means here. Like, are they really deeply pro-Trump and allegedly committing crimes in order to get back at China, or is that actually the facade? And that facade is in order to get the money through the alleged scheme. Very, very, very confusing.
I feel that way
amazing.
about Miles Guo, the guy that was funding all of Bannon's efforts.
Yes.
Right?
Incredible story.
Yeah, because he's a Chinese dissident supposedly, but then it's like it's not 100% clear if he's a real Chinese dissident that was taking money from expat Chinese and feeding them to Steve Bannon to attack China, or whether he's like a double agent pro-China Chinese asset who was like using Steve Bannon to, to foment unrest in the American political environment. Like it literally could be either.
Yeah, no, this is real, neither. It's real like John le Carré stuff. Totally. Like you just don't sort of, like just sort of game of shadows. I'm totally unclear what people's motivations are. Including maybe there's an amazing New Yorker piece on Guo, like including maybe unclear to Guo day to day. Like maybe he's just living in the moment, surviving.
Wow, fascinating. We'll put a link to that one in there. I'd read part of that one and I think got distracted, as I sometimes do on the internet and my Epoch Times. The Epoch Times thing I did.
No, but I mean, this is an amazing
you have to watch. It's like Children of the Corn shit, their ads, and it was very strange. Lastly, my last thing for you. I've been dying to ask you this. What is the point of semaphore?
Wow, what a reference. Children of the Corn. Sorry.
I want to know. You're running semaphore. We are running a media outlet here. Like, what is the point of it? Why? There are a lot of media outlets out there. Like, what are we serving?
I don't know what you're serving. I mean, and I think there's space for many different kinds.
No, I know. I'm saying as somebody who's doing a startup media company, this is a question we ask ourselves, and I'm saying now I'm asking it to you.
No, I appreciate it, and I actually think one of the nice things about the media environment we've been talking about is that there's space for a lot of different kinds of things. Yeah. In a way that's a bit new. I mean, for us, like I think we're trying to talk to an audience who feels, who is deeply engaged with the things we write about, with global politics, U.S. politics, finance, technology, media, and often reads or watches or listens to stuff in the in the establishment media, and is sophisticated enough to know like that there's something, or it feels in some way that it's not totally on the level, that the publication, for sort of formal traditional reasons, can't just come out and tell you what it thinks, that the writer is sort of harboring certain views and a lot of expertise that they're keeping out of it, and there's sort of a blurring of fact and opinion, and I think we're trying to do.
They have an opinion and they call me. It's like when one of these journalists calls me and they're like, will you give a quote for the thing that I think about this thing so that I can put it in the article?
Yeah, this is the standard article. It's like who, what, when, where, why, journalist's theory disguised as fact. Quote from Tim Miller restating that.
Yeah, right.
And so I think we're trying to sort of pull that apart. Say, here are the facts. Like, we're sophisticated enough, and you are sophisticated enough to be able to say, these are the facts. Here, I've been covering this a long time. Here is my view. But also, Tim Miller has a totally different view. I'm including his quotations calling me an idiot, because you're going to actually trust me more, not less, if you know that I am open to the possibility that I'm an idiot. So so we're trying to be transparent. We're trying to be transparent in the way we present news, trying to keep it at a pretty high level, and trying to take a global view, because I do think most of the big stories in the world, are, like, including the rise of right-wing populism, are kind of hard to understand if you don't see them globally.
Yeah. How do you feel like that model's work? Just the straight, not like the business model, but the straight article, the deconstruction, if you will, of the
People like
article.
it.
Do they?
Yeah, I mean, it's the feedback's been really good. Broadly good. I don't know. Some professor told me he's teaching it to his students, which made me kind of happy.
It's nice. I'll tell you, as a consumer of it, what I like is sometimes I really just want to know what Dave's view is.
Yes.
Dave Weigel's view. And so I'm like, I know the facts, but I'm like, Dave is actually there and following this stuff. So I'm just looking for his view on this. The only time I don't like it is sometimes it feels like the reporter has to give a view. I feel like you need to evolve it to an option where it's like the reporter's like, I don't really know about this. And maybe that does happen sometimes. I just read that article.
It's funny. We in various ways often will just sort of quietly remove the view section, because yes, of course, often you report some facts, have no idea what they mean. Yeah. But maybe we just should have a check mark that's just sort of like a shruggy emoji.
Yeah. And that's what Dave's view on this. Shruggy emoji. Come back for more.
I feel like that so often.
Yeah, same. Ben Smith, thank you so much, man. It's always good to see you.
Thanks for
the new
having me, Tim.
podcast is Mixed Signals. Mixed Signal or Mixed Signals?
Mixed Signals.
Mixed Signals with Naeem Araza. And, go check out Semaphore. He's got a newsletter. A bunch of other people have newsletters. And we'll be talking to you again soon. See you, brother.
Thank you, Tim.